Hey guys, welcome to the first video of my workshops based on self-empowerment. And before I start, I'd just like to say that all the content in here has actually been cross-referenced and double-checked and everything like that, and it's not just taken at face value. And as we go through the workshops, it's really about understanding that you have to do the groundwork and you have to do your homework. And more importantly, you actually have to put the effort in if you're going to change and empower yourselves. So this is by no means the be all to end all, and some of the content and some of the topics in here may or may not resonate with you. I'm hoping that just by the mere point that you're actually watching this is that you have some interest in maybe some self-empowerment, but also that I can provide and present to you some interesting facts and some interesting truths that will help you to understand the foundation of how not only we can empower ourselves, but also the impedances that we face towards that disempowerment, if you like. So without further ado, let's have a look and see if there's anything here that I can give you that'll help you to take more control of your lives. So before we go anywhere, I have a bit of a standard disclaimer. As I said, this is not presented to you as the be-all of end-all. It's just a starting point. And there'll be a lot of topics covered, and a lot of these topics will actually maybe prompt you and present you to go and have a look for yourself. Find your own path or maybe enhance the path that you're on. Some of these topics may not interest you at all. But ultimately, I believe they're necessary to help you understand and to underpin what you need to know to move forward. And the whole purpose of life is really about, for me, ascension. So going from one point of, I wouldn't say ignorance, but a point of maybe unenlightenment to enlightenment. Now, my standard disclaimer here is from a very famous martial artist whose name was Bruce Lee, if you don't know who that was. And he paraphrased a very interesting saying, which was that, I'm just a finger pointing to the moon, or I'm just a finger pointing to the information. Don't focus on me or judge me. Um, just focus on the information. And as I said, it's definitely not should be taken as gospel. And every day, as you go through life, you'll find that there'll be more and more information that comes your way that either enhances or maybe even refutes some of the information I'm giving here. But it's a starting point. So my standard disclaimer is I'm like the finger pointing away to the moon. Don't focus on me or you'll miss all that heavenly glory. Couldn't be said better. So self-empowerment, what is this? Well, it's basically the ability to take control of your own lives. There's a lot of manipulative processes out there and a lot of things that stop us from achieving. And the idea is to develop systems and practices that remove some of those distractions, things like that can get us moving forward. Um, you have to have an awareness of the things that stop us from achieving. And that's really important as well. And a lot of that isn't necessarily that obvious. Um, and I know it sounds a bit harsh, but the majority of people out there are actually operating out of a subconscious reactive level of mind where the consciousness has been suppressed for various reasons. And I'm not going to get into conspiracy theories in these works. Some of you might be into that, and some of you might be aware of some of these manipulative processes. But those are the things that stop them from achieving. So it's really important, first of all, as a methodology for self-development, is self-awareness, being aware of what's there. And then from there, you can develop. So there's conditioning, conditioning from all sorts of areas, conditioning from our education, conditioning from our peers around us, conditioning from the information that's been fed to us. There's a lot of conditioning out there that conditions or forms you into a certain a way of thinking, and so it's a paradigm. So what we're looking at now, these are very interesting times, very special times within the history of the world, there where things are changing, and I certainly don't have to convince anyone that things have really changed in the last 2 to 3 years, from the idea of everything is stable and we're going to carry on like this for centuries, to the point now where we don't know what's around the corner. So it's really important that we remain flexible, we remain open-minded, and the more prepared you are for something, the less likely is it's going to affect you in a really great way. And that manipulation, as I said, comes from mainstream media. It comes from our censorship of things. It comes from what is presented to us in our books, in our art, all sorts of things. All that manipulation going on there. And that's from society, our habits, getting people addicted to certain habits. You know, everything from sugar to tobacco to alcohol, to drugs, of course, to pornography. All those things, all those habits tie us down and stop us from seeing the world in a broader perspective, because we need to focus on those habits to appease them. So they can really stop our growth and development. Emotions. Um, Emotions are very powerful, and we can be manipulated via those emotions. Emotion means energy in motion, and once that momentum, which is another part of emotion, once that momentum has taken control of us, it's very hard sometimes to stop that. And we're seeing a lot more people suffering from emotional instability, anxiety, stress, those sorts of things. Of course, the more emotional you are, the less you can be sensitive to the higher energies that we're going to talk about within this series. And so it's really important, again, that we control our emotions. Now, just on that, before we go any further, emotions, and we cover this in the second workshop, that's really important for us when it comes to the creative process. We need those emotions. A lot of my spiritual teachings that I've come across in the path have said you need to balance those emotions. Now, that balance doesn't mean that you become not emotional whatsoever. As a good friend of mine, an alchemist, said, you know, even the gods get angry. You know, so we need those emotions sometimes to kick things along. So they're an essential part of life. Our fate and our karma. This is really important in regards to what stops us from achieving, especially where we may be succumbing to karma from not only this lifetime but past lifetimes, and some of that area we're going to traverse as well. But really, your fate does stop you from achieving. You've got to overcome your fate and your karma before you can really take control of yourselves and your life. And just understanding and addressing those aspects of that karma coming through. The choices that we make. Now, we have free will to choose whichever way we want to go. And again, the important thing here is that we take responsibility for those choices, and that before we make those choices, that we really consider all of the options and opportunities there, and weigh up the pros and cons, so to speak. You know, there are positive choices, but and we get positive outcomes from those positive choices, just as there are some choices that we make are negative, and we have to succumb to the negativity of those to work through them. Now, control starts with the mind. Absolutely. It's a mental exercise. It's a mental skill that we develop, and therefore, as we find out when we go along in these training modules or workshops, one of the first rules of um, Hermetic wisdom is that all is mind, all is mental. So it's really important that we delve into the depths of the mind to understand better how we can self-empower ourselves. Now, some of you might have seen this picture before, and just explaining what it really is, if you like, there is a veil of the difference between what we think or our perception and what's really going on out there. And this is really to some extent taking a look behind the veil. Now the veil is like if you imagine a veil of illusion, and that comes from all sorts of different inputs, such as things like the mainstream media, as I say, gaslighting. I've only learnt about that in the last few years, but um, gaslighting where it's changing the lighting tempo or the light ambience. So because you might see something in the light, but in the darkness or in the dimness of a gaslight, you actually think you see something else, and then that's bolstered by something like the mainstream media trying to convince you that what you're looking at is something different than what's really going on there. So it's really looking behind that veil. In some religious practices, they would call that the Maya or illusion. So we're looking through that elusive thing. Remember that through our five senses, everything that we see, feel, touch, smell, and hear comes through a filtering system before it actually gets into our mind. And I want to also, through this series, distinguish between the mind and the brain, because the brain is a bit of grey matter, which is just like a piece of meat, so to speak. How can that actually hold memories and have thinking involved in it and all those sorts of things? So what we're really looking at here is that filtering mechanism. It's our perception, the way we perceive things, and that perception can be manipulated. So it's really about understanding that mechanism. The Matrix, great movie. Probably could have been a documentary in some ways. It was really poignant, really timely, and there are a lot of principles in there that were really to the point. If you look at the idea of a Duracell battery, that's interesting in its own right. That if you break down the way that we are born into the world, we are literally forced to work and pay taxes, um, which to me is a supersession of our God-given right, which is that, takes away our free will and forces us to do something. And I've been told many times when I'm in a job, you're a machine. Well, machines break down and machines get replaced. So in that sense, looking at that idea of the matrix and taking some of that energy and actually channeling it into more positive outcomes for ourselves and our loved ones, rather than frittering away all that energy towards a, a goal or something that is not really ours, is taking away your energy. Now, we play a lot with words throughout this workshop because words are really important, phonetically rather than written down. Written down is another story altogether, and we go through that, the idea of spelling and casting spells. But distraction is one thing that sort of holds us back. Traction, if you take that word, it means, to gather momentum, to gain flow. And distraction means to take away that flow or to break that flow. So one of the things that's like in magic, magicians are really good at creating a distraction and then doing something over here while they're actually um, doing the trick over here. So taking your attention away is another really important thing as well. And again, we use that breakdown of that word in its real phonetic sense of attention. We look later on at the idea of talk and tension, and the idea of intention, attention, and extension, and how that works within the idea of manifestation. So again, tension could be understood in the negative sense as stress, but just like a diamond goes through a high um, degree of tension to forge it, that has a positive outcome as well. So everything has a negative and a positive. And our focus, where we actually are looking, this goes along with distraction and attention, and is really important if you want to achieve and self-empower yourself, is to actually understand not only what's taking your focus or your inability to focus, but doing exercises to focus that attention, and also to focus on your goals and to remain pointed towards your goals through that power of intention. So those three things are really important, and they go hand in hand and they cross over with each other. Okay, so looking at the Philosopher's Stone, and something I wrote about quite a while ago is this book called The Philosopher's Stone, and I encourage you to have a look at it. But after We've actually been through these workshops, and the Philosopher's Stone comes from the idea of the Hermetic principles. And within the Philosopher's Stone, there are basically sacred geometry in four main geometries, and they are the circle, the square, the triangle, and the larger circle. And so the first one of these that we look at is the earth element in session one. So elementally, we're going to work our way through, just as we would work our way through these elements in our succession towards manifestation, conscious manifestation. We're going to start with the foundation, which is the earth element, which is reflected in the Hermetic principles as the earth element. So that represents foundation. It represents the principles or principles. It represents the basics, and it also represents the laws. So these are the universal laws that we're bound by, and that we need to work within. And some of those laws form things like karma. They form things, the law of attraction, the law of various laws that are universal laws, not the man-made laws. Some of those laws are not really for the betterment of humankind. Some of them are for control. So we want to look at how we can work within the universal laws and make those universal laws work for us as well. Now, we're also going to be looking into history, and the earth element provides us that backdrop for understanding history. The earth element, the square also represents the five elements and the four corners of the element, the fifth element being in the center, or around the outside, I should say. So those are the four elements of alchemy, and they're represented here by the air, the fire up above pointing upwards, and the water and the earth pointing downwards. Those are the four elements of alchemy. And the idea is that through the square transitioning into a cube, we're now gaining our perspective. Now, perspective is really important as opposed to perception. And one of the things I'd give the example of is in respect of perception, the way we perceive things may be only a very narrow way of perceiving. So we're looking at things at face value, for example, rather than we're looking at things from different angles, from a different perspective. One way we do that is by asking other people's opinions on the same thing and seeing what their perspective on it was. Hey, did you see it this way, or what did you see? Is really important. When we are learning and studying and gaining knowledge, it's really important, as I said before, to cross-reference things. Don't just take everything at face value. Even worse than that is we're living in a society with a cancel culture, which means that someone you mention something to someone and they just totally, oh no, I don't believe in that, and that's it. Or alternatively, you talk to someone about something and they dismiss it straight off. And so I'm a little bit cheeky in my challenging people. Say, for example, without getting too controversial, the war in Ukraine. People, admittedly, I don't support war, and it is a bad thing. So don't judge me on that. And I am a warrior, so I do understand that there are positive outcomes that come from conflict, but not necessarily to the degree it's going on. But if you're discussing something with someone about that, and they're just their perception is that this is what's happening and that's what's happening. Well, I would ask them things such as, do you know what the Minsk Agreement is, and do you know what happened in 2014? And every side has two stories to it, so make sure that you're looking at things from a perspective rather than just a single perception. It's really important. It might be like an example as recent as you go to a restaurant for the first time, and from that you either have a good experience or a bad experience. But then you might talk to people who say, yeah, no, it's fantastic, it's really good. And it might be just that the cook was having a bit of an off day, and you still got a decent meal, but it wasn't the best. And you go next time and it's a fantastic experience. So again, if you were looking at it from a perceptive point of view, it would just be a one-off. You've done it, it's crap, I'm not going there again, rather than actually giving it a bit of perspective by actually getting other people's opinion. So it's really important that you look at things from a greater perspective. From that, you dispel myths. So you know, the myth that this is as it's said, and that's all that's related to. Now, later on in this work, in the historical part of this, we actually delve back into the past, and the people who are delving into those beyond modern archaeology, for example, or history, are actually cross-referencing. So if I'm presenting anything here by dispelling myths, it's not just oh, I read this once in a book or I saw this YouTube clip. I actually have cross-referenced it as these people have as well, and their credibility is really important. So that's important when reviewing history. And the other thing the earth element and the square represent is mindset. Now, mindset's huge. The idea of attitude is everything is really important too. The way you approach things, and you approach things from a certain type of posture or stance. So your mindset in looking at things is really important as well. Looking at things from an open mind, not a closed mind, is really important. So that's really key to having the right mind. An open mind is really important. So you might start off with this Rubik cube that's all messed up and all mixed up, and what you're trying to get to is make some sense of everything, put things into perspective, put things relatively into place as well, and see how everything connects. Now, one of the things that I've discovered is that everything is connected. And again, you could argue, well, how can you be connected to me, or how can a butterfly flapping its wings on one side of the world affect the weather on another side of the world, all that sort of thing. But if you think that everything actually started from a single point, a singularity of before the Big Bang, and then moved itself out or expanded out as we're still moving out from our galactic center or the center of the galaxy, then that started from a single point. So with that, everything is connected. So just keep that in mind. Now, one of the most profound things someone ever, or I ever came across, that really stopped me in my tracks was this idea of we are spiritual beings having a human experience. So think about that for a second. We're all spiritual beings. We are not human beings trying to find spirituality. We are trying to find ourselves through spirituality, and we're trying to find our spiritual selves again. But we're not human beings totally devoid of any spirituality. Now, the other play on words within here is spiritual beings and being spiritual. A lot of people go through a lot of spiritual practices and spiritual learnings, and they claim to be spiritual because they have this big library of all these books that they've read. But unless you can integrate that into your being, then you're just a collector or a librarian, if you like, of information. So it's really important that not just um, collecting that knowledge, but actually being spiritual. Do the work, do the meditation, do the exercises that we do here, and give them a go, and actually not just claim to be spiritual, but actually be spiritual. Now, another important thing here is question everything. Why? Why is this happening this way? Why did that happen? Why did she say this? Why did he do that? Why am I here? All those sorts of things. And if you ask those all the time, this is where wisdom comes from. All those whys. And there's a play on words again on the word wise. And there's a saying, knowledge is power, but only wisdom is freedom. So yes, again, you can have the big library with all those books in there. And quite often, it's quite funny now with the not so much the YouTube, but the Zoom and the Teams things and the Skype thing. You've got someone sitting there with all these books behind them, and you're looking at the books, and what they're really saying is, this is my credibility. I've studied and read all these books, therefore believe me. But again, do you believe in those books? Do you believe in the information in those books, or you just paying lip service to them? So it's really important. Another thing is when we look at our growth development, from 1 to 7, 7 to 13, and 13 to 24, those three different stages of growth. The mindset here should be approach it with a childish, a child wonderment. Open your mind to everything, and then take everything and look at it the way a child would look at it for the first time. rather than, oh, well, I know a bit of this and a bit of that, and that's rubbish. And my feelings on this is this, and my thoughts on that are that, and my beliefs on this are this. Just come in with an open mind. I'm not saying I'm going to change your beliefs. I'm not trying to convert anyone to anything, but just have that open mind. The old adage from Matthew 7:7 of the Bible was, seek and you shall find. You know, look for things. Go out there and actually discover things. Don't wait for stuff to come to you like this. I mean, I would hope that this is just the start of your journey. It's not, well, now this is going to go on the library behind me, and I've done Stuart's workshops, and I've got his book. That's that's defeating the purpose of this. It's actually to motivate you, to actually empower you. Now, in the first class that I did, I offered some homework, and the question was, find out for me what astrological house the moon is in in this case, it was on the 10th of May when we started these workshops through the 11th of May. Um, and that's all I gave people, and I hoped that they would go away and come back and with an answer. And that was really a test. It's like, well, I don't want people coming back to me and saying, well, how do I find this? I mean, one of the amazing things about the times that we're in at the moment is we actually have resurrected within our fingertips, within the air really, is the Library of Alexandria. In the sense that in the Library of Alexandria there were over 500,000 books on all sorts of esotericism, mysticism, spirituality, magic. That Library of Alexandria contained a lot of information, and when the Romans came through and actually burnt it down, a lot of that information was lost, but a lot was actually hidden. A lot of it was uh, re, re produced out of the oral traditions as well. And so, in the case of finding something like, the astrological sign that the moon is in at the moment, I left that up to you to go away, find a moon calendar, and actually find that for yourself. Not only that the moon was in Capricorn, but also that the sun is in Taurus. Now, on our second part of the workshops, we have a look at the astrological houses, astrological influences. And again, if you get that sort of aversion straight away, it's like, oh, no, I don't believe any of that crap. I'm going to turn this off. That's not really an open mind. When you, again, consider astrology has been around as long as humanity, basically. Went right back to the Sumerians and even further than that. So, um, we look at that and discuss that. And the significance of the moon being in Capricorn and the sun in Taurus is that's essentially they're both earth signs. So the Capricorn is an earth sign, Taurus is an earth sign. So you've got the sun and the moon both in the earth signs. Now that again becomes very significant when you're looking at astrological influences and how they subliminally influence the way we behave. And to an even greater degree, the unconscious behavior of a lot of people on this planet. The majority of people have no idea why they feel a certain way on a certain day, and then they feel another way on another day. And you don't have to go much further, and I'm going to get into this in the second workshop. But if you talk to most of the emergency services, they'll dread a full moon, for example, because lunacy, as a term, the lunatics come out, and it really is hard going on a full moon, and that's a well-known phenomena. So yeah, that's just the moon has influence. But then, of course, we look at the larger planets, more massive compared to our planet. They do all have that magnetic influence within us. So again, in respect of the Earth elements, if we were going to do any form of study, the Earth is about capturing and consolidating. So it's actually about forging a foundation. So it's a good time to study when the moon is in certain phases as opposed to other times. Now, I explained in the introduction how I always I made observation. I used to have a moon calendar on my wall, and I made some observations later on after I was looking at the moon calendar. So it's not like I was checking and then making adjustments to what I was doing, but it was the other way around. So, for example, I used to work in the construction industry, and I used to get up every morning quite early and throw on a pair of shorts and then out the door, pretty much before anyone was awake. And I started noticing that I was wearing different coloured shorts at different times of the week and times of the month, and I basically had a red, a blue, a green, and a grey pair. Sorry, red, blue, yellow, and grey pair. And then one morning I sort of got up and I wondered why it was. I reached in the drawer and I went for one. I went, no, I'll go with this one. I looked on the moon calendar and I was actually aligning myself subconsciously with the different energies of that particular influence. So on an earth day, I would put on a grey pair of shorts. On a fire day, a red pair of shorts. On an air day, a yellow pair of shorts. And on a water day, a blue pair of shorts. And I think that speaks a lot to observing your subconscious reactions to things, and that also went into the idea of traveling to work. If you're driving on an earth day, you'd get into traffic jams. On an air day, there'd be people cutting in front of you. It seemed like everybody, had a bit of an airhead about them. On a fire day, you'd see accidents quite often. People would come to grief. And on a water day, you'd cruise. You'd just flow through. So they did become quite prevalent, those influences. So and that was just by having a moon calendar on the wall. Again, I didn't get up and say, well, today I'm going to drive really smoothly. It was after that. And an example of that, and I'm going to give you a lot of these anecdotes throughout these series, is from my experiences and observation. We had I was in the building industry. We had a crane fall down one day. After a series of events. And when I went home and checked on the calendar, the moon chart, it was not only the moon was in Leo, but also the sun was in Leo as well. So it was a double fire day, and coincidentally, that happened at 1:30. The crane fell down, and at 1:30, that's when that sign came into the moon aspect. So yeah, a lot of correlation there. Just a lot of observation. Opening your eyes and being open to things is really important. The earth element and double earth element also, as I say, not only the consolidation of things and the foundation and forging of things, but all about the material realm, all about gathering all that material, that content, and the fabric also, connecting the dots together. It's like if you're making a jigsaw puzzle, it requires a lot of patience. So therefore, it's an earth. That's an aspect of earth. So you're sitting down and actually using that patience to find things through observation as well, and putting that, although they're not always square, jigsaw puzzles, they are rectangular, which is a form of a square as well. So a little bit of a correlation there as well. So I just thought I'd give you a few of my favorite sayings that sort of form the backdrop of my philosophy. There are three types of people in the world. There are those who make things happen. These are the leaders, the people who get out there, the inventors, the people who are sort of at the forefront of a lot of new innovation. There are those who watch things happen. Now, these are the observers in the initial stages, basically, like myself. We talk about in this series conscious and unconscious magic. So unconscious is where you're actually making the observations and making the connections, and then conscious magic would be, or conscious manifestation, magic manifestation would be where you're one of those people who make things happen. And finally, there are those that wonder what happened. So there are people out there who are looking at things and going, what's going on here? How did that happen? Or they don't see coincidence, or they don't see synchronicity. And then they wonder because they don't believe in all this extra stuff that's going on behind the illusion or the Maya, and therefore they can't make sense of it. And just got a little picture of Yoda here. And the point here is that there's a lot of wisdom comes from a lot of different angles. A lot of artistic expression comes from higher sources. Quite often you ask a musician, what gave you the idea to write the song? And they said, oh, I just sat down and started writing a song, and it came from feeling, and then it manifested into an actual beautiful song or whatever. So a lot of those, even movies, George Lucas, writing things about Star Wars. I mean, who knows? It could be a documentary about what's really going out there in the planetary spheres and in the different galaxies and things. Again, it's having that open mind. Nothing comes from nothing, so it's got to have come from somewhere. You're never given a problem without the ability to solve it. Now, this is really important, where the universe, and when I refer to the universe, I'm talking about the gods or God or whatever you want to say, but something higher than our own level of consciousness, um, gives us a problem. And keep in mind that we do have spiritual guides that look after us. Some are relatives from the past, some are higher beings, um, but they actually want us to ascend and to evolve into a higher level of consciousness. So when we're given a problem, we're never given that problem without someone or them knowing that we have the ability to solve it. So when you think that you're in this un, unresolvable situation, it really is a matter of stretching yourself and looking at all of your options and all of your choices, and maybe changing the way you're doing things is a big part of it, in a way of getting out of the problem that you have. So it's keep that in mind, that you're never given a problem without the ability to solve it. Now, the measure of a person's the distance of their word. In the beginning was the word, it says in the Bible. And again, I'm not going to ram the Bible down your throat, but the way I measure a person is how good is their word? How far does it go? If they say something a year ago or even a week ago and then they don't follow through and yet don't sort of qualify it with, well, there is a good reason because I couldn't do this and couldn't do that, as opposed to an excuse. Uh, that's the way um, I don't say judge. That's the way I measure people. Judgment's a bit different. And those are the sorts of people I like to be around, and you should surround yourself with, is those reliable people who actually do what they say they're going to do. Um, in regards to conscious manifestation, the word is one part of that, and so it's important that always you follow through with that, because it's about building up that power through the word. What you don't want is what you need the most. Now, I'm not saying go out and drink a glass full of poison. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying when you find yourself in a situation, and you're saying, I don't want this. It's actually the universe saying to you, you need this. You need to work through it, because what they're putting forward to you and you having the ability to solve it is a situation that will make you stronger. They always say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Now, there are some of the disciplines I follow, the asceticism, which is putting yourself under stress and under hardship. And I get up in the morning and I sit under a waterfall in the freezing cold. I don't want to do that, but I know that that's something that I need, to help me maintain balance and to sort of take the edge off things. So, what you don't want is what you need the most. The more prepared you are for something, the less likely is it's going to happen, is another favorite saying of mine. So being prepared, not just on a physical sense, obviously you leave and you make sure your spare tire is good before you go on a long journey, or you pack everything to make sure you've got everything you need. Being prepared, how often do you go on a holiday and you're so prepared for the cold weather and it's sunshine all the way through, and you've got all this extra baggage that you took that you didn't really need at the time, but ironically, I believe that if you didn't take it, it would have been freezing. So it's really be prepared for things, and be prepared within yourself. Um, how often do you say to yourself, I really don't want to go to this party, and what you don't want is what you need the most, and because there are people there that are going to do this and do that, and you go to the party and you find that never happened because you prepared yourself, you went beyond yourself, and you went to the party and then found that you had the best time in the world. So, there's a classic example as well of that particular adage. Your universe is you in verse. Now, again, this is a play on words, and what it's really saying is that what's reflected back to you is what you put out there. What you don't like in others is really what you don't like in yourself. Now, that's a bit harsh, but what you're actually doing is, you're seeing people's weaknesses through the matrix of your mind's eye, which is what you don't like in yourself. So when people are doing certain things and you're criticizing them, 9 times out of 10, it's actually something that you don't like within yourself. So yeah, what you don't like in others, and that's a good way of understanding, um, by reflection is the way you are, and when you change, the people around you change, their attitudes change, their reflection response changes, people change, the people go out of your life who are only there to help you with that certain aspect of your life, and then other people come in. So yeah, that's your you inverse. One of the ones I like is don't be a whinger, be a ninja. Um, Practicing martial arts for so many years, and ninjutsu specifically, what that really means is that don't just sit around complaining about things, get out and do something about it. I always remember going to a friend's place and we were watching a movie and it was late at night or late-ish in the evening, and next door neighbor, it got quite windy and their shed had a loose bit of stuff on the top of it and it kept banging and it was annoying him, and he's going, oh, every time it's windy, blah blah blah. And I said, where is it? And he said, oh, it's out there. So I just climbed up on the roof, had the ninja skills, um, fastened it down with a bit of weight, a brick, and enjoyed watching the movie from then on in. And it's one of those things like one of the other sayings I have is like the toy on the floor syndrome. You know, you go, you're doing some work and you leave something on the floor and you're stepping over it or stepping around it, stepping over it, stepping around it, and then you think, oh, I'll move it, and then you think, well, why didn't I do that ages ago? You know, so making your pathway and your life easier by actually actioning things is really important as well. So don't whinge about things. You made the choice. Do something about it. So let's have a look at some of the things out there in respect of the suppression of knowledge. Now, gnosis, agnosticism, is actually knowing the is or knowing things. The is a Taoist term, and we get into that later on. We looked at the yin yang and things like that. But really, that suppression of knowledge that's been going out there for a long time. Now, remember, I said knowledge is power, but only wisdom is freedom. The less knowledge we have, the less freedom we have. It's as simple as that. So there has been a lot of suppression of knowledge. There's been a lot of stuff happen in the past that has been either hidden from us if we knew about things. For example, in the idea of the occult, soon as people hear the word the occult, they think of demon worship and Satan and Lucifer and all that sort of thing, and they think of it from an evil perspective. The occult just means hidden, and there again is that suppression of knowledge. In respect of the occult, it actually came from back in the 13th century in the demonization of the Knight Templars, who were originally served the Pope of the time, and they were there to protect the roads to Jerusalem, to the Holy Land for the pilgrims traveling along those roads from bandits and what have you. And because they went to the sort of seat of Christianity, there were a lot of hidden things around Jerusalem that they uncovered, and they acquired a lot more knowledge than the Catholic Church. They acquired a lot more wealth than the Catholic Church, to the point where they were demonized, and this is where the word occult comes from. So again, that persecution of the Knight Templars, which of course it forced them to move underground. When they went underground, they migrated to various parts of the world, and that's where your Rosicrucians and your Freemasons and those people came from. And again, Freemasons have been put in that same basket, as you know. They're trying to take over the world, and they're in every government and that sort of thing. Being a Freemason and being the master of a lodge, I can tell you that we certainly don't conspire to subjugate and oppress people. It's not that way at all. In fact, we give more to charity than any other organization in the world. So that doesn't wash with me. I'm sorry. Now, some of the things that have been hidden in regards to archaeology is ancient masonry. So when you're looking, this is Baalbek in Lebanon. It's one of the foundation stones that never actually got to be put under a temple. It's 200 tons, and you can see it's perfectly carved into a rectangle. And supposedly, according to our archaeology friends, the modern archaeologists, they're saying, well, this was all done with with copper chisels and mallets, and some of this stuff is granite. It's as hard as, I say to say, as hard as rock, but it's very hard. It's hard rock, and there is no way you could do a lot of this work. And the rubbing, to get it really smooth is just it's farcical if you really think about it. And that's the thing. They want to do the thinking for us, so therefore we just take their word. They are experts. What do we know about it? And they're not experts by any stretch of the imagination. The pyramids, now that is interesting. You know, these things have been here since a long time before the ancient archaeologists would tell us, or the modern archaeologists. The Sphinx, for example, the weathering on the Sphinx says that it's succumbed to a lot of rain, and it hasn't rained in the desert for a long time, a lot longer than they're claiming, the 5,000 years. The pyramids and their construction and alignment is something we cannot build today. And those are 10-ton blocks that are making up those millions of blocks. Again, pulling those up with pulleys and ropes and rolling them on rollers. Again, it's just ridiculous. I'm sorry. The pyramid alignment with like the constellation of Orion, again, is perfect. And the sacred geometry and the measurements. If you look at some of the work out there from various scholars, the mathematical correlations to things and the measurement of things, things that are set in stone that are there for us to really investigate and come to better conclusions in the archaeologists is what they're all about. In the main temple, the Great Pyramid, which supposedly was built by the pharaoh Khufu, or for him, as a tomb. Again, that's ridiculous. That's a nonsense. It doesn't have any characteristics of a tomb. Interesting coincidence in the respect of the crypt within the main part of that temple, of that pyramid, is exactly the same measurements as the Ark of the Covenant. And that's measurements are in the Bible, in the Old Testament I'm talking about when I mention the Bible. So interesting coincidence there, and the knowledge and the wisdom that the Knight Templars had in respect of the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail as religious artifacts attest to the importance and maybe the significance of the power of those objects. I'm not saying where they came from, but they certainly had a lot of power. You put those in one of those pyramids and you've got power for everywhere. Polygonal masonry. All around the world, you see these stones that are not only in walls, but they're actually perfectly cut out to fit in the walls. So on different angles and things to suit the stones that they're up against. And you couldn't put a razor blade between these joins. You know, they are so perfect. And when you're talking about a 10-ton piece of stone that you're fitting into a wall, you're not going to pull it out, cut a little bit off here, put it back in. No, it doesn't quite fit. Cut a little bit off here. You just wouldn't have that ability to manipulate in that way. So when you look at the idea of sonics and sound as being a medium for affecting things, that's now become quite an interesting topic in mainstream science. The way these things fit together, and the fact that they're all over the world. They're not just in Egypt. They're in South America, in Machu Picchu. They're in Greece, in Easter Island. So they're all over the place. So that's the precedent knowledge is how those were made is really interesting. And when you look at that advanced masonry, these stones here, or these carvings, or whatever you like to call them, are from Pumapuku, which is in Peru, up in the mountains of Peru. And when we look at the angles and the accuracy of these stones, certainly not done with copper chisels, and they've had top masons look at these things who work with stone every day. It's really hard stone as well, and there is no way in the world that you could make such perfect joins and such perfect detail, even with the equipment we have today. Certainly lasers might be able to do a reasonable job, but they didn't have lasers back in the day when these things were put together. Another interesting fact about these is that these H blocks on the right hand side there, the measurements between the or the square measurements across the base, this is actually exactly 1 meter. And measuring up, that's exactly 1 meter. Now, the interesting thing about these is the metric system didn't come in until a lot later on than when these are supposedly being discovered or manufactured. So the meter is a measurement that goes back a long way, and the meter is a measurement that's used within the Great Pyramid when it's broken down by mathematicians. They had an archaeologist who claimed that this was all done by the smoothness rubbing sandstone with a grit up and down it to get the smoothness. He had to swallow his words when they brought a highly technological device in there to measure smoothness, and it was so smooth that it equated to the smoothness of glass. Of course, pitted, so it didn't have the reflection. But yeah, he was gobsmacked. He certainly changed his tune on his theory on how these things were made and the accuracy of them. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of indications of things that have gone on before so-called modern man that points to ancient civilizations having higher technology than we even have today. And here's a plinth from one of the temples, Karnak in Egypt. And on here, you know, we can't just dismiss the idea that this looks so much like a helicopter and this much so much like a jet boat or a boat cruiser. This looks like a rocket ship. You know, we can't discredit these things that they were just an accident. You know, it would have taken a mason, if they could even do this, you know, months to carve something like this. Why would they go to all the trouble of carving a helicopter if they weren't trying to tell us something? Not only that, something that's really interesting when you look at these things, this is actually a relief, which means that it juts out from the rock, and behind it is a very smooth substrate. And even just the fact of actually smoothing all that off in these very fine areas, and when you look at these hieroglyphs, and they might have a whole series of birds, every single bird is identical, as if it had been stamped in. So again, you know, how do they do that? Again, it's asking those why questions of whys. Now, this is a really interesting topic or subject in relation to giants walking the earth in the past. And you see things on the internet such as people uncovering skeletons of giants and giant skulls, and they've been discredited as hoaxes and that sort of thing. Well, in the Bible, in the Old Testament, in places like Genesis 6, Numbers, Deuteronomy, they all refer to the giants, and the giants were called the Nephilim. And these giants were different sizes. There were a lot of different types of giants as well. And even as close to home as Raglan, giant skeletons have been found in a cave around even where we are. Sardinia, they found a lot of giant skeletons there. And what's interesting is that as soon as they disclose these to so like these museums and things, they disappear and you never see them again. But there are some skeletons that have been recorded, and those records are still around. And if you look at, you know, 36 foot, I do recall the more you get into this, the more you hear things. They uncovered a giant skeleton that was 56 feet tall. So yeah, there were different races here of giants, and these giants were kings. A lot of them, because of their size and stature, they were revered as kings and gods. Gods such as Saturn and Zeus, the same thing. They were actually giant figures as well. Now, there's also a mention of the Anunnaki in a lot of Egyptian and Syrian information, and going back to the ancient races such as the Sumerians. So again, here is a giant, and you see the smaller figures here, which are representing that they are actually life size in their stature. Stories of Goliath. Now, Goliath, they measure giants in cubits. So a cubit is from the point of the elbow to the tip of the fingers, depending on which king was in the rule at that time. And so, just in the Bible, where you've got a measurement of cubits, if you translate that into feet, Goliath was 10 foot 6. So he was a huge being. And of course, David was just an average sized human being. And how David was able to take down Goliath with his weapon there. Og, King Og, is also in the Bible. He's in cubits, his measurement translates to about 12'6". And here's a drawing of a bed that Og slept in. And this bed is 13 foot long and it's made of steel. And they basically wanted to record this for history for the Israelites who actually fought a lot of these giants and a lot of these wars. Um, and they wanted to show just how big Og actually was. So this is why they had this. They actually had the bed on display for quite a long time. No one knows where it went, of course. Gilgamesh, he was another large giant. By cubit form, he was 19 feet tall. Now he's got a little cat as a pet there, but that's actually a life-size lion. So again, that's giving you an idea of the scale of Gilgamesh. And yeah, 19 to 20 foot tall. He was a big guy as well. Now, if we didn't believe that giants did exist, here's Robert Wadlow. Now, Robert Wadlow was actually 8 foot 11, nearly 9 foot tall. According to his medical history, he died at the age of 22 from a foot infection, but he had a problem with his pituitary gland. So maybe he didn't have a problem with his pituitary gland. Maybe our pituitary glands have actually been genetically modified so that we don't grow as big as the giants did for whatever reason. But yeah, if you don't believe in giants, I mean, if he's not a giant in our way of thinking, although he's only 8 foot 11, what is a giant? Other instances of modern day giants, they're acclaimed by natives, and a few Westerners have seen giants in the Solomon Islands. The Japanese were terrorized by giants during their occupation of Guadalcanal in World War II, and there are stories of them. Interesting story of a giant that a person who worked in Solomon Islands for quite a long time. He ran his Jeep off the road and went to a village to get his help to put his Jeep back on the road. He came around the corner and here was a few villagers from another village with this giant. And the giant had just lifted his vehicle back onto the road and then walked off into the jungle. By the time, because they were quite scared, by the time they actually got there after they had gone, and he gauged the height of the giant against the trees and figured out that that giant was over 14 foot tall. There are also a story of special forces coming up against the giant in a cave in Afghanistan. This giant was 13 feet tall. He took out a whole squad of Marines and a couple of Army Rangers before they actually got it. And some of the accounts of this giant, he had double rows of teeth, was red-headed, pretty smelly sort of thing, a bit like a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, but lived in this cave. And they basically, under cover of darkness, took him out underneath a helicopter and put him on a C-130 and flew him back to the US, and he's never seen again. But there are accounts from people on those crews, like the loadmaster on the C-130, who've come forward and said, yeah, I was involved in the recovery of that giant. So yeah, there still are indications of those around the world. In here in Egypt, outside one of the temples in Egypt, again, we've got these huge statues of these key figures within Egypt. You've got a smaller figure in the middle between them, and if you look really closely between their legs, they've got these even smaller figures, which are exactly the same size as these tourists. So what's that telling you? Again, that this was the actual size of those. And when you think if that's halfway up his leg or their leg as a sort of 6 foot person, you know, you are talking probably 10 times or even 7 times that amount. So, you know, the 40, 50 feet mark for these actual figures here. Oh, and also talking about the hybrids, in the Bible it says that these giants actually bred with the woman of man, and they got themselves into trouble, which some would say God rained down the flood, the great flood, to actually cleanse the earth, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, again, I'm not going to preach the Bible to you. Now, another suppression of knowledge, which a lot of people don't realize, and there's a play on words, real lies. Either real lies, as in these are real lies, or you see things with your real eyes. not the fake eyes, or as I said before, the matrix of the mind's eye, in which is covers our perception or gives us our perception, but really our perspective is what we're looking through. So in this case here, the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD was formed by Constantine. Constantine was an emperor. He had wanted to become pope. And so what he did is he got all the archbishops together. He was very powerful, all the bishops, and he formed the Council of Nicaea. And they said, we're going to put a document together or a book together that is going to define not only religion, the Christian religion going forward, but also is going to meet his needs and his aspirations to become the Pope. Now, this book was actually called the New Testament. So he actually put together the New Testament for the purposes of changing the knowledge or changing the wisdom or the information. And a lot of people follow this New Testament. What's important about this is that there's a lot of suppression of knowledge within that. For example, they omitted writings from people like, or not people, but beings like Jesus. They removed 8 of the 12 apostles that were written about in the Old Testament for whatever reasons. They changed the calendar. So December, if you think about it, Dec means 10, and Oct means 8, and yet December is the 12th month and October is the 10th month. Sept, which is 7. So they moved the calendar to suit the needs or to suit the desires of Emperor Constantine. And a lot of the wisdom is still in the Old Testament. So again, looking at the older documents, there is a lot of stuff in there. And, even if you said to your Christian these days, would you believe in giants? They'd probably say, oh, don't be silly. But it's all there. It's in plain sight. And it's in other cross-reference documents as well, such as Epic of Gilgamesh, Enoch, the writings of Enoch, and a lot of those things that were suppressed. Now, ancient technology, just, here's the Anunnaki, and this is Tiamat. Now, it's interesting what he's holding here. So, is artifacts, which we still haven't found or we don't know about, but they seem to be quite common. He's holding this little carry bag that a lot of these beings seem to be holding, wearing wristwatches or some sort of watch idea, and also holding a pine cone. And not only holding that, what looks like a pine cone, but directing it in a certain way towards a certain thing. Now, again, there's a story of talking about things like levitation. There's a story of a guy named Ed Leedskalnin who built this thing called the Coral Castle in the US. And this Coral Castle is built out of these huge blocks of coral, coral stones, and they're carved into, plinths and things like that. And anyway, there was a story about a truck driver who turned up with a load of this coral, and these blocks were really big, and the truck driver said to him, where's your crane or your forklift? How are you going to get these off? And he said, oh, don't worry about it. He said, just go away and have a cup of tea and I'll sort it. Anyway, he came back and the truck was empty, and this Ed Leedskalnin, who delved a lot into magnetism, had actually somehow taken the things off the trucks and actually mounted these plinths. Anyway, there was a backstory around that where these kids had actually seen him unloading this truck, and what they said was that he had these 2 cone-shaped objects that he was using and levitating these boulders, huge boulders or huge pieces of coral. So again, an interesting correlation there. And the idea of the pine cone relates to the pineal gland. There are 3 main glands in the body: the pineal, the pituitary, what we talked about before with giants, and also the thyroid gland. Those are the 3 principal glands within the body, and they all control hormones and all sorts of things. But it's interesting, you got this huge statue in the Vatican Square in front of the Vatican, and they're revering this thing that looks like a pine cone. Why? When you actually look at a pine cone, and we talk later on about things like the Fibonacci spiral, it does actually align with the golden mean, which is phi. It does have that golden mean sequence within that pine cone as well. And you see these pine cones all over the place. in this is the caduceus, which is the staff of Hermes. At the top of that, you see it in the staff of the Pope, of course, in front of the Vatican there, as we saw before, and it's situated in the middle of the brain. This is a cut cross section of the brain, and this is the eye of Horus. And interesting, the correlation there as far as spiritual development goes. Now, another interesting thing about ancient technology and ancient beings is this is Osiris. Now, if you study ancient Egyptian mythology, Osiris had a partner called Isis, or a wife called Isis, and his brother, he got into a stoush with his brother who was called Set, and they also had a son called Horus. So all of this family stuff form part of the mythology. But what's interesting about Osiris is he wears this hat, and a lot of the Egyptian kings and pharaohs actually wear these hats. Now, correlating with that is actually they found a lot of conical skulls around the world, and these are naturally formed. Some of these academics will tell you that some of these tribes practice what they call wooden wrapping around the skull to make it elongated and deform out that way. Well, they must have had a model of something they were trying to achieve, but by the same token, some of these geneticists have actually studied these skulls and have come to the conclusion they are actually formed that way from birth. Now, that sort of opens up a few ideas in respect of the size of the grey matter or the brain. And now, again, I'm correlating that with the mind and the capacity of the brain and the mind, because it is actually a translator for the mind into the physical neurological systems of our body and our being. The larger the brain, the more capacity for thought, the more capacity for intelligence, as it were. So, when you've got these conical skulls, the brain again is probably a third to a half the size of ours again. And when you think of giants, these giants weren't dumb. They had bigger brains, which meant they had larger capacity for consciousness. So really interesting, the consideration of those skulls. Now the statues, we see them everywhere. This is just up the road in Hamilton, and we just walk past these and say, "Oh, that's nice," but why is it? Again, asking the why. Why is it that Horus actually has the face of a lizard or the face of a crocodile, and you've got Sobek here who has the face of a bird? Why is this? What were they trying to represent here? And they're holding a magical item which is called the Waz, or the Waz, and the Waz is a magical staff that also has the representation of the bird on there. So these were wands, magic wands, Waz wands. Another thing that's interesting is the discovery of these crystal skulls everywhere. There's 13 of them that have been discovered so far. Again, skilled people or intellects have looked at this and they still can't tell you how they were made, and some of them have been dated back a long time. And it's interesting, it's solid crystal. If we look today at crystal stored on or information stored on crystals, and they're working towards that technology, you've got a 360 terabytes on this little disk of crystal. It's got the whole of the Holy Bible on there. That's about 72 million photos that you're putting on a little slither of that. So you imagine if you were to encode within those crystal skulls, one that's sort of, quite large, how much information you could encode on there with this technology. And some people have speculated that those skulls are actually mini computers, or they're actually computers. So that would be the whole history of the universe, including everyone in that history, every person, every being, everything that's happened in the universe up to a certain point could be encoded in one of those skulls. Now, another sort of interesting field that correlates with spirituality is they're now looking at storing data on DNA. So on a strand of DNA, or a gram of DNA, you can hold 233 petabytes of data on one gram of DNA. Petabytes. So you've got your gigabytes, your terabytes, and then you got your petabytes. That is a massive amount of data just on one little strand. And they're actually put this into practice, and they're doing it now. There was a company that encoded some information onto a strand of DNA. They gave it to some other company to decode. They opened up this little test tube and they looked in it and he said, oh, there's nothing here. And they saw right in the very bottom, once they removed it, a little speck of DNA. They decoded the data on this DNA because they're doing it as a test. And I don't know whether you recall Martin Luther King's speech on I Have a Dream. And they decoded it, and not only did it have encoded on it Martin Luther King's speech, and it wasn't in text form, it was the video of it. And that was encoded in this little tiny speck of DNA, one speck, one strand. So it's amazing that DNA forms our body. DNA encodes everything in every strand of DNA we have in our body, encodes everything that is needed to build our whole body, from our skin color to our hair color to our everything. Now, that's really fantastic. But when you listen to scientists saying, 75% of our DNA that's packed into one of these DNA strands is junk DNA. When you look at the perfection of the human body, whoever created it or whatever created it, and the way it works, it's just phenomenal. Do you really think that they would have made 75% of our DNA junk that was useless for anything? I mean, come on. You've got to ask the question. It's like our brains, and again, I talk about that loosely as in the brain correlating with the mind, saying that, we only use 12.5% of our brain. Well, again, why would something so fantastic that was created, we'd only use a very small percentage of that particular capacity? Again, either it's been locked down for a various reason, or science just can't figure it out. I prefer to think it's the latter. They've just got no idea whatsoever. So yeah, they're still guessing. And we're, unfortunately, just because they wear a white coat and they've got a degree or a few letters behind their name, a lot of people believe that, that's gospel.